Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. These are the three little Dendrobiums that was in the unboxing video a couple of videos ago. And I'm not going to mount all these on film because once you've seen one, you've seen them all, because they're all going to be treated the same basically. But again, as far as my mounting is concerned, pieces of bark, these have been pre-sterilised, which is nothing more for me than putting them in the sink and pouring boiling water copiously over them on both sides and leaving them to steam for a bit. I then rinse them off in cold water. This little diddy one here is for that little diddy plant there. That is a tiny plant. If you do get a very small plant, putting it on a huge piece of bark, it will look silly. Now in practical terms, it'll grow into its mount. Well, that would be the idea, unless it dies of course. But if you get a very small mount and put a very small plant on it, as the plant expands, the whole piece of bark can be mounted on a bigger piece. And it works. It actually looks okay, and the plant will spread onto the larger piece of bark. And that obviously saves unmounting a plant that's attached to bark, which is not easy, trust me. You will damage roots. If you're very lucky, a good few will manage to soak off. If you pre-soak them literally for like 24 hours, some of the roots may start to detach. But the whole goal of the roots attaching to the mount is to hold the flipping thing still through wind, storm and trials and tribulations. So they don't like coming unstuck. So once they're there. Anyway, paraphernalia, as I say, I'm only going to do one on film because they're all much of a muchness. That's my special screwdriver that's actually had the blade sharpened, and I use that to make the hole. Wire cutters for cutting wire, pliers for bending wire, associated wire, and I use fishing line to actually tie my mounts on. My scissors are there. They don't need sterilising this time because I've already sorted the roots out and I don't plan on cutting any roots off. And this nasty piece of work, and I mean nasty piece of work, every one of those teeth is like a razor on both sides. It's a pruning saw. It cuts on both the push stroke and the pull stroke. It is razor sharp, as I like, but unfortunately, when cutting that piece in half, some of us weren't as careful as we were normally, and we've taken a chunk out of our hand. I haven't cleaned that up yet, I'll do it in a minute. I'll live. At the end of the day, I've seen worse. And of course, the appropriate beverage, coffee. It's AM, so we haven't moved on to anything else yet. Two of the plants had perfectly good labels on, perfectly readable. You know, if somebody's got good writing and does a nice neat label, I'm quite happy to keep their label. However, the other one I lost and I never found it, so I did one of my own. And the beauty with labels with holes in is that they tie on the back of the mount. I always put my labels on the back of a mount, not on the front. Okay, so the three plants. This is the little Jenkinsii crossed with aggregatum. Now this is a nice little plant. You know, having got it out, it's got a pretty good root system. There's a little bit of moss still up in there, but this had been recently potted, so the moss is new, so I'm not too worried. It's also still got some pieces of bark that are just too well attached. I'm not going to tear the roots for the sake of getting a couple of tiny little pieces of bark off. They'll just stay there, and this is going to lend itself, lovely new growth here, it's going to lend itself quite nicely to going on a mount. That's going to look good, that one, and should grow on relatively quickly. Now this Delacurii fell into two, and I mean fell into two. It was two plants basically, a little bit of a con trick, but I don't mind because that means I can spread it out a bit more on its mount and make it look bigger because it is tiny. Three good new growths on this bit and two leafless bulbs at the back that will sit nicely against the mount, leaving the new growths to push out some new roots and attach. They're very, very fine spindly roots, and some of these aren't too good, but quite honestly, when a plant's that small and it's going on a mount, trying to trim off roots is almost a waste of time. And this one has got a tiny little new growth coming there, so it will pull on. It's very limp. I think it's been allowed to dry out too much. But so those two to go on a mount. This tiny little Latoria green elf, I do hope that actually lives. It's not in very good nick. But this growth here is in actual fact a new growth. So it's got a couple of older bulbs, and they are tiny, and one little new growth. The roots aren't bad, they've had some damage on them, but there's enough there to keep that alive to push that new growth on. Strictly speaking, that new growth could live off of the old bulbs, because the plant is so small, those bulbs relative to that new growth are quite large. So that could take its nourishment from the old bulbs and still manage to push out okay. But it has got some roots that are still working. So that's the three. As I say, that's the muck that came out. 3 tiny little plants like that, and you've got a mountain of stuff that they were in. They were grossly overpotted. Anyway, largest piece of bark for the largest plant, so I'll get those two out of the way, and we'll choose this one. Now, one thing we do have to choose is the way up it's going to go. And a lot of that with my choice is to do with where the hole's going to go. You can mount that way if you choose to. You know, the fact that the veins in the bark, grains in the bark, whatever you want to call them, can go that way, doesn't matter. It looks more natural upright. That does look a little odd. But once the plant's covering it, you're not going to see much of it anyway. That's if it lives, of course. Anyway, so I need a hole in that, and they need to be, obviously it needs to hang centrally. If you put your hook there, it's going to look like a diamond instead of a squarish shape, which again looks a little odd. So the hole's either got to go there, or it's got to go there. And quite honestly, that is so thick, I'd have trouble getting my hole through there. So I'm deliberately choosing that because it's slightly thinner where the hole's going to go. And the hole is nothing more than a sharpened screwdriver. So the blade on this is not for doing up screws, it's for making holes in pieces of bark. And because it's sharpened, it goes through quite easily. Yeah. And then what I usually do is go around the other side, because it always seems to manage to close up slightly, and just go through again, just to make sure that hole is nice and clear. Now, a bit of advice. It's an awful lot easier to make a hole and put some wire on a mount with no plant on it. If the plant was on there, I'd be bashing it around. So always think about doing your wiring and your hole making and your poking around prior to actually putting the plant on. Now I come from this side, I go over the top, and I go over the top there. This is bonsai wire, so as you can see it bends pretty easy with my fingers. The only bit I won't be able to do with my fingers is making the loop to hold it tight, which is what the pliers is for. And that just comes over the top and gets pinched onto there like that. And that holds everything nice and tight to the wood and to that. And then that just twists upright like that, which means the wire is at the back of the mount, which I like, yeah, because that's where the hook's going to go. And this doesn't need a long hook, it's only a short plant, so probably about there. Yes, they are sharp. Again, bonsai wire cutters. It's funny, everything to do with bonsai is razor sharp. Those are bonsai pruning shears. Stainless steel, got Japanese mark on them. They're good quality. They're sharp, and they'll last me forever. They'll last longer than I will. And again, these are bonsai wire cutters. The leverage you get on those two handles against those tiny little blades, if you know your physics, is tremendous. Take your finger off, that would. And then, as far as the hook's concerned, it's just a quick twist with the pliers to get a hook. Okay, so that's the mount done. Now we need a bit of moss, and I'm certainly not going to put a lot of moss on, but what I do like to do is make sure that the moss goes in any crevices, because that's where the roots are going to go and try and grab hold. Some will go on the surface. Now, how big's my plant? Where's the new growth? There. So that's going to be the back. The new growth. See, if you just take a look at this plant, this has been grown from a seedling. So this is a single plant. These are the tiny little seedling pseudobulbs. New growths are less likely to come from this end of the plant. These are the maturing pseudobulbs, and quite honestly these are flowering size pseudobulbs, and that is at the moment the only new growth. So this needs to go over that side, because those young, seedling pseudobulbs are unlikely to push new growths out. So by pushing it over this side of the bark, it'll allow it to go across. Okay, so that's the idea. So we need a reasonable bit of moss. We don't need much under those seedling bulbs because they're not really going to grow. They're just there to support things, but we do, however, need some on that side. Okay, don't need loads. You really don't need loads. You just need a covering. That's all you need. I don't need any down there, do I? Yes, those roots are quite long. We do need some low down. But we don't need stuff up under where the bulbs are. That's probably enough. I could do a little bit more over there. Just a little bit. And that will probably do as its bed. Obviously I will put some more over the top of the roots. So the plant's going to go quite high. I'm going to turn it over at an angle, so as the new growth comes out it's got somewhere to go, and a relatively smaller amount of moss over the top without going mad. I want to be able to see these roots through the moss, because if I can see them, so can the air, and the air can then get to them. So I get my wet dry process as we go. Now actually getting that lot to stay there while I tie on will be a miracle. We'll see what we can do. Okay, some fishing line. Lots of fishing line. Probably have to go round quite a few times. There's my little nook. There he is. Come on, do up. There we go. A nice good length of fishing line. Concentration juice. Start with a slip knot. Well, I always do anyway. They're easy to tie and they hold. So one of those pulled pretty tight. That way once I get this to grip it won't slide undone again. Nice big loop, and very delicately, without knocking all the moss off, just get my first loop on the go, which can go quite high. It can go up there. See, some of the moss is falling off already, as expected, but not too much. It'll manage. And then as I pull that tight, that's my first loop. My second loop, I'm going up. I'm going right to the base of the plant, and then I'll put a few lower loops just to hold the moss in and the roots against the bark. Now that's it, that'll hold. Now by rights, under normal circumstances, I would put one right through the middle of the plant, and if I've got enough, just about, yeah, only just, I want to put one through the plant against some of those older bulbs. The reason being it's extra security for the plant, leaving just about enough left to tie on, and I really do mean just enough this time. I've normally got stacks, but left that a little bit short this time. It's still enough for my clumsy fingers to be able to tie off. And there we go. There, so that's that one done. A couple of little straggly bits hanging down there, which we'll trim off. The roots that are hanging down there can stay. They're aerial roots, simply because they are hanging off the bottom. And that will do nicely. That is a firm, well attached plant. Some of the roots have got attachment as well by being held. Some of them have got some moss above. Some of them are bare. As I said, if I can see them, then they can see the air. And if they can see the air, they have a very good opportunity to dry in between waterings. Okay, that's basically it. The only thing left to do is put the label on the back, which I'll tie on. So that's what will happen to the other two, and it's a very simple process, and you know, they look good. Mounted plants look nice, or they do to me. You know, that's brilliant. That's going to look nice in the collection, and it's going to look really, really nice if it flowers in the spring, and it's going to get every opportunity to flower in the spring, because by then this new growth will have pushed on. These three here are this year's growths. Because it's a hybrid with Jenkinsii in that I've got, I know its growth pattern from that parent. I don't know much about the other one, but they are very similar plants. They have similar flowers, but the beauty of the aggregatum is that it has quite a few flowers on its spike, whereas Jenkinsii tends to be singular. You might be lucky and get the odd pair, but they tend to come out in single flowers per spike. So the combination of the two should be pretty good stuff. I'm hoping to get the deep yellow of the Jenkinsii combined with a yellow flower anyway, so it's not going to change its colour much. But, you know, nice, good, waxy, long-lasting, good yellow flowers. That's the goal. Okay, so that's that one. That's a remounting video, or how I remount stuff anyway. And now I'll go and clean up my wounds. I'll get the cat to lick it, I think. Cats are good at mending wounds, better than people. And yes, I am joking. Okay, here's all three of them done then, and all in the space of 1 cup of coffee, which is pretty good going. So that was the checking the label Dendrobiums. 2 plants, yeah. I've got 3 new growths spread nicely along there, and a tiny little growth on that separate plant. So providing that plant can hang on long enough for that to get going, it's got some roots, so it should hang in there okay. So that's that one labelled up. It's a nice little plant. Out of the 3, this is going to be my favourite. It's another version of the squash grape plant. Single nice new growth coming out here, and room for that plant to spread across that way. Who knows, it might push some out the back and move this way as well. My other one did, it went in all directions. So that's the Jenkinsii crossed with aggregatum. I'll get my head around that soon. That's a nice plant, although it's a genuine miniature, so those are the size of the bulbs. They might get a little bit bigger, but not much. That is a flowering size plant, so hoping for blooms on that next year. And then this tiny little thing here is the Dendrobium green elf, which is a Latoria type. Now I hope this one makes it. It's not a strong looking plant, but it does have a new growth. So, you know, we'll have to be a little bit careful with that one. These like moisture, they drink, okay? But they don't like soggy, which is why I've left quite a lot of the roots exposed, and, you know, I can see them, so there's air can get to them. So I should be able to, even in moss, because it's on a mount, I should be able to do the wet-dry cycle on that, and give it plenty to drink, but allow it to dry quite quickly. In a pot, that wouldn't be very easy. The pot, with so few roots on such a small plant, would stay wet too long. So for me, that one just had to be mounted. Maybe later in its life, you know, when it's a big bushy plant with loads of blooms on, perhaps it may go in a pot. But certainly for now, I need that on a mount. Okay, that's those 3 done. So say, all in the space of a single cup of coffee, albeit only lukewarm left. Okay, thanks for dropping by. See you next time.